Chapter 24 The Three Monks. The first 2 days on elephant back were uneventful. They traveled at night and slept during the day. Nick had no idea where they were or how far they had come. Maya didn't either. Hilltop carefully avoided all trails and roads. As a result, Maya was getting a different view of the forest that she had lived in her entire life. She and Nick were also getting a different view of her great grandfather. At the plantation, Hilltop rarely spoke, and almost never about himself or his past. But on Elephant Back in the deep forest, he couldn't seem to stop talking. He sounded so much like Ning. There were times when Maya thought she was listening to her father, as she had so many times before. He told them about his travels. It seemed that the only places Hilltop had not visited were North and South America. He admitted that Colonel Nagayoshi coming to the plantation was his fault. Nick was of the opinion that the colonel would have found the plantation on his own without Hilltop's help. When he was in London, Bernard had explained that the best way to find an enemy installation was to simply look at a map and ask yourself where you would put the installation, then send an operative in to see if it was there. Bernard and his mother were tight-lipped about what Bernard did for the army, but Nick was pretty sure he was an operative. The most interesting things Hilltop shared with them were the details of the night Hannibal was attacked by the tiger. The attack was your father's fault, he told Nick, and Bukong's. Back then, Hilltop explained, Bukong was one of the best mahouts on the plantation. The only mahout better was Nang, who had just been promoted to Singung, which Bukong was very upset about. When Hilltop left the plantation, the sergeant major had appointed Bukong and Magwe's father, Singung. The position had stayed in their family through 2 generations, and it was assumed when Bukong and Magwe's father died, Bukong, the older son, would become the head mahout. But Nick's father broke the tradition and made Ning Singung. Ning was a better mahout, Hilltop said, but more important, a better leader than Bukong or Magwe, who wanted to become Singung even more than Bukong. Magwe got his wish, Nick commented. Yes, Hilltop agreed. But back to our friend here. He scratched Hannibal's ear. Ning assigned Hannibal to Bukong and sent them up to Sway Hill, a difficult and very dangerous place to log, but what made it worse was Hannibal's tendency to wander during the night. Even with his front feet hobbled, he could cover miles before sunrise. In order to fulfill his logging quota, Bukong had to wake up hours before the other mahouts to search for Hannibal. He went to Nang and asked to be assigned to a different elephant. Nang said he didn't have an elephant to spare. Bukong then went to your father and asked if he could tie Hannibal at night. Your father said yes. That night the tiger came. Hannibal could not get away. Why would a tiger attack something as big as an elephant? Nick asked. His father had never explained this in his letter. Tiger cubs, Hilltop answered. No one was there, but this is what I think happened. A mother and 2 cubs were drawn in by the sound of Hannibal pulling on his ropes. One of the cubs got too close. We found the cub in the brush some distance away, his ribs crushed. Nick knew how that felt. To protect her remaining cub, the mother attacked. Hannibal killed her as well. What about the second cub? Maya asked. We never found it, so it must have gotten away. I assume that was the last night that tiger ever got close to an elephant. Nick wondered if the tiger lying on the library floor was the one that got away. When Bukong found Hannibal the next morning, he thought the elephant was dead. Hilltop continued. We all did. The blood around Hannibal's body had turned the ground into mud. When Jackson arrived, he sent the mahouts back to work so they would not see him cry. Nang and I stood with him, looking at the fallen Kung Yi for quite some time. When we were startled out of our mourning by a deep heave of Hannibal's chest. At first we did not believe our eyes, but he took another breath and his trunk moved. We spent the rest of that day and part of the night treating his wounds. We had to use other elephants to turn him over. It took 3 days to get him to his feet. No one thought he would live. Nang and your father built a crush around him and put slings around his chest and belly to help him stand. We did not leave his side for 6 weeks, treating his festering wounds several times a day. He laughed. Tending the wounds became more difficult as Hannibal regained his strength. Eventually, we were able to let him out of the crush, but he was never the same. If anyone attempted to fetter or hobble his feet, this included your father, Nang, or myself, Hannibal would try to kill them. As far as I know, after the tiger attack, he never slept at night again. Without proper rest at night, an elephant cannot move logs during the day. So avoiding Japanese patrols wasn't the only reason they were traveling at night, Nick thought. What happened to Bukong's leg? He asked. Your father blamed himself for Hannibal's injuries, Hilltop answered, but Hannibal blamed Bukong. 1 year after the attack, almost to the day, he came into the village while everyone slept. Bukong had kept the family's tiger skin, the female tiger skin, as a souvenir. It's difficult to know whether Hannibal scented the skin or Bukong, who had tied him, but he went on a rampage, tearing Bukong's house apart. He would have killed Bukong had it not been for Nang. Several mahouts tried to pull Hannibal off Bukong with chuns and spears, and were injured in the process. Nang used the tiger skin. He pulled it out of the rubble and waved it in front of Hannibal like a matador's cape. Hannibal chased after him. When they were safely out of the village, Nang threw the skin into the air and dove behind a tree. Hannibal picked up the skin and ran off into the forest, slapping it against tree trunks. After this, Bukong lost his desire for being a mahout, and his leg injury made it impossible. Your father appointed him as head houseman. Little did he know that Bukong's ambition went far beyond supervising the staff at Hawk's Nest. Nick was still nervous around Hannibal. It wasn't easy to forget his first encounter with him in the village. Maya, on the other hand, was feeding Hannibal by hand at the end of their first day together. His favorite treat seemed to be the large seed pods of the tamarind tree. Before she slept, Maya climbed high into trees and collected pods that were out of Hannibal's reach and fed them to him throughout the night. Hilltop's only rule was to stay away from Hannibal's feet. If he thinks you are trying to restrain him, he told him, he will kill you. It doesn't matter how many tamarind pods you have fed him. Nick hadn't been anywhere near Hannibal's feet the day he got hit, but after watching Maya, he decided he should give Hannibal another chance. He took a pod out of her bag and tentatively held it out to him. Hannibal stepped forward, sniffed the pod with the tip of his trunk, then picked it from his hand as if it were a delicate flower. After this, Nick started filling his own bag with tamarind pods before going to sleep. Sleeping during the day was difficult because of the heat, swarms of biting insects, but it was made up for by the cool nights on Elephant Back listening to Hilltop. In fact, it was so pleasant, Nick and Maya sometimes forgot the danger they were in. It all came back to them on the third morning. They were out of food, and although Maya and Nick were able to gather fruit here and there, it wasn't nearly enough to fill their stomachs. A year earlier, Nick couldn't imagine eating a monkey. Now he eyed the chattering primates playing in the canopy hungrily, wishing he'd thought to bring a rifle from the tunnel. There's a village not far from here, Hilltop said, as they shared the last bites from the last 10. I'll go down with my bowl and see if any of the villagers are in need of a blessing. We'll go with you, Maya said. I don't think that if you visit the village, Maya interrupted, every village within 50 miles will know that Tangba is in the area. If you go there alone and someone sees you with us later, they will wonder where the 2 novices with you came from. Besides, Nick added, we need to practice being novices. What better place than a friendly village? We'll also have 3 bowls of food to share instead of 1. Hilltop thought about it in a few moments, then reluctantly agreed, but he insisted they all bathe and wash their robes before they left. If a villager smells elephant on us, they will know we are not on foot. We are close to the railway. The soldiers may not care about 3 monks, but they would certainly be interested in confiscating a trained timber elephant. They walked into the village single file with Hilltop first, followed by Maya, then Nick. The village was small with only a dozen or so ramshackle houses that looked as if they would blow over in the next breeze. There wasn't a person, dog, or chicken to be seen. Abandoned, Nick said, his stomach growling with disappointment. Silence, Hilltop said. A man stepped out from behind one of the houses. He walked up to them cautiously and bowed. It's an honor to have Tangba in our humble village. The honor is ours, Hilltop returned the bow. Nick and Maya followed suit. The man glanced at the two novices curiously, then turned his attention back to Hilltop. They call me Kaya Lay. I have heard the name, Hilltop said. In Burmese, Kaya Lay meant tiger's breath, an odd name, even for a Burman, Nick thought. A few more people began to show themselves. They came out of the towering jungle surrounding the houses. Women, children, old men. Oddly, Kayale appeared to be the only young man in the village. What brings you here? He asked. The people drew nearer, perhaps 20 of them in all. A pilgrimage, Hilltop answered. A dangerous time and place to be traveling. Hilltop did not comment. Kayale whispered something to a girl standing near him. She smiled and ran off. A few moments later, she came back carrying a pot of rice and a large bag filled with dried fish and meat, which she could barely lift. It's not much, Kayale apologized, handing the food to Hilltop. They have to hide when they have, or the soldiers come along and take it from them. Hilltop handed the heavy bag to Nick and the pot of rice to Maya. It was enough food to fill their bowls 20 times. He was about to give Kayale his blessing when somebody shouted a warning. People scattered as two jeeps roared into the village, sending up plumes of choking dust. Two rifle shots into Two rifle shots into the air stopped everyone in their tracks. Half a dozen soldiers jumped out of the jeeps and began pushing and prodding everyone into a tight group. There were two Burmans with the soldiers carrying rifles slung over their shoulders. They stood to the side and did not participate in rounding up the villagers. The seats of the first jeep were covered in tiger skins. Sitting in the back was a young captain holding a teak baton inlaid with ivory. Heads down, Hilltop whispered. Nick took furtive glances at the frightened villagers. To his surprise, Kayale was not among them. Where had he gone? The captain got out of the jeep slowly. He ordered 3 of the soldiers to search the houses, wiped the dust from his tunic with distaste, then swaggered over to the group. Who are you? He asked Hilltop in Burmese. Ting Ba. Of course, the captain said, but he didn't seem impressed. He looked at Nick and Maya, and these two, my novices. The captain took the bag out of Nick's hand and looked inside, then lifted Nick's chin with the end of his baton. Where did you get this? Nick knew enough Burmese to understand the question, but not enough to answer. My novices have taken vows of silence, Hilltop intervened. The food is from Colonel Nagayoshi at Hawk's Nest. We brought it to the village because the people are hungry. He has light eyes, the captain said, staring at Nick. My mother's eyes, Nick thought with rising panic. An unfortunate flaw, Hilltop said. They are orphans. There were many orphans and abandoned children in Burma now, their parents dead or sent off to work in labor camps. One of the ways they survived was to become novices. This way, they were at least able to get food. The captain lost interest in Nick and turned his attention to Maya, lifting her chin with his baton. Hilltop had had them shave their heads and eyebrows again, but Nick wasn't sure it would be enough to disguise the fact that Maya was a girl. He scrutinized her for a long time, then let her head drop back down to Nick and Hilltop's relief. The three soldiers came back from searching the houses and reported they hadn't found anything. The captain nodded, then, without warning, slapped one of the old men across the face with his baton, leaving an angry looking welt on his cheek. We heard that Kaile was here, he said. All the villagers vigorously shook their heads. He is a thief and a traitor. Anyone caught hiding him or helping him will be executed. He looked at Hilltop. What about you, monk? Do you know this Kaile? I have heard the name, Hilltop said, meeting the captain's gaze without a glimmer of fear. Have you seen him? The captain shouted. I have never seen a tiger's breath, Hilltop answered. Have you? The captain raised his baton as if he were going to hit him. Hilltop's expression did not change. The captain's face turned red with rage, but he lowered the baton. Burn a house! A soldier trotted over and set one afire. It went up in flames like it was made of rice paper, but it was an empty gesture. A bamboo house could be rebuilt in a day, and a new house in this village would be better than any of the others still standing. The villagers knew better than to keep anything of value in their houses. Your colonel may not be able to protect you much longer, monk, the captain said. You've heard about the airfield? Of course, Hilltop answered. By now, everyone within 200 miles would have heard about the explosion. Were you there? How could we be here now if we were there then? The captain looked confused. Nick was confused too. We are on foot, Hilltop said. Several days from Hawk's Nest. I understand the accident happened 3 days ago. Nick understood now. The captain was trying to trip Hilltop up. If Hilltop admitted he was at Hawk's Nest when the airfield blew, the captain would know that they weren't on foot. Nagayoshi is in serious trouble because of the accident. Dozens of soldiers dead. The airfield was all but destroyed, all because he didn't have the sense to store the armaments properly. So Magwe had gotten away with it, Nick thought. The Japanese thought it was an accident. I suspect he'll survive the setback, Hilltop said, although he did not believe this. We will see. The captain handed the bag of meat to him. If he doesn't, perhaps I will have the pleasure of running across you again. By the way, my name is Captain Moto. Perhaps you have heard of me. Hilltop shook his head. Captain Moto motioned his men back to the jeeps. The two Burmans with rifles scowled at Hilltop before they climbed into the captain's jeep. Hilltop gave them a bow, then watched them drive away. Chapter 25, The Second Camp. Who were those two Burmans with the captain? Nick asked. Hill tribesmen, Maya answered. Trackers. Kaile is really a thief? Notorious. Did you notice the tiger skins? They would have been hard to miss, Maya said. Hannibal noticed too. He must have picked up on some of the tiger scent. That's why he flared his ears and threw his trunk back when we got there. We are lucky he didn't charge us. He seems all right now, Nick said. He and Maya were 30 feet up in a tamarind tree picking pods for Hannibal. After they had eaten, Hilltop had fallen asleep beneath a tamarind tree and was still asleep despite the racket his novices were making above him. Tell me more about Kaile, Nick said. Before the war, the British tried to put him in prison, Maya said, but they were never able to catch him, and the villagers continue to protect him because he gives them money and food. Like Robin Hood, Nick said. Who? Nick explained who Robin Hood was. Yes, Maya said. He's like that. I thought he had been killed or sent to a labor camp. I've heard stories about him my whole life, but that's the first time I have ever seen him. Why do they call him Tiger's Breath? People say he is as elusive and dangerous as a tiger's breath. Well, he sure vanished from the village. I looked up and he was gone. I thought I would faint when the captain pointed out the color of your eyes, Maya said. Yeah, me too. There's nothing I can do about their color, but I should have thought about it beforehand. When they got down from the tree, they were still too excited by their close call to sleep. They walked down to the stream so they wouldn't disturb Hilltop. Hannibal followed. But it wasn't long before the previous night caught up with them, and they too fell asleep. And this is where Hilltop found his novices just before sunset, lying next to each other, both fast asleep. Hannibal was lying on his side across the stream. Unlike the children, he had heard Hilltop's approach. He lifted his trunk and sniffed the air, but didn't bother to get up when he determined it was just his mahout. Hilltop returned to where he had been sleeping, scribbled a fast note for Nick and Maya, put it near the food, then picked up his bag and walked off into the forest. Although he had enjoyed being on elephant back with Maya and Nick, it felt good to be alone again, walking through the forest with only his thoughts to keep him company, and he had much thinking to do. This encounter with the captain in the village was disturbing. Hilltop knew he could no longer rely on Colonel Nagayoshi's protection. The Japanese did not tolerate mistakes. Those who made them were punished. The power was shifting as it always did. The captain had sensed it. If they had gone to the village a day or two later, the outcome might have been very different. The safest thing would be to get Nick and Maya out of the country right now. They could be in Umfang in 2 days, but of course they would never consent to it. Not now. Not with Indaw and Jackson still in the labor camp. Maya and Nick were just like their fathers and their fathers' fathers, stubborn, brave, and at times foolish. Hilltop shook his head and felt a shiver go down his spine. They had no idea how close they had come to being killed that afternoon. The captain had wanted to do it, make an example of the three of them to the villagers. If Twang Ba and his novices were not safe, no one was safe. He saw it in the captain's eyes as he raised his baton. The only thing that stopped him was that he didn't yet know where the power would go. And it was all about power, big and little power. Who had it, how much, and how long it would last. Hilltop sighed. He would just have to find a way to get Jackson and Endall out of the camp. That was the only way to get Nick and Maya out of the country to safety. But how? In the short time Nick had gathered a lot of information about how the camps operated, but none of it would do Hilltop any good if he couldn't figure out a way to use it. There were two problems to solve: freeing Jackson and Indaw, and then getting them out of the country. There were no secret passageways at the labor camp where they could bide their time until the Japanese gave up the search. He needed to get inside the camp and look around, perhaps even talk to Jackson and Indaw, which was why he had left Nick and Maya behind. He had to move quickly. He came upon an area of forest that had recently been logged. He could see where they had cut the trees into ties for the iron rails. It wouldn't be far now. Maya heard Hannibal stripping tree bark with his tusks and opened her eyes. She was surprised to find it was dark out. Hilltop usually roused them before sunset so they could pack and saddle Hannibal while there was still light. She shook Nick awake. He sat up and looked around in confusion. What's going on? Where's Hilltop? Maya was already on her way to the spot where Hilltop had been sleeping that afternoon. When Nick caught up to her, she had found the note and was trying to read it. He lit a candle. I've gone ahead to the labor camp on my own to find out what's going on there. Please stay here with Hannibal and await my return. I should be back in a day or two. No fires. If you see someone, hide yourselves. H. Why didn't he tell us? Nick asked. He probably didn't want us to try to argue him out of it. We might be able to catch up to him, Nick suggested. Maya thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. He could have left hours ago, and it would be difficult to follow him in the dark. I think we should stay. Hilltop knows what he's doing. Yes, he does, a man said in Burmese. Nick and Maya jumped. Who's there? Nick asked. No need to be afraid, the man answered in English. It's Kayale. He struck a match, lit a cheroot, then walked over to them. You followed us? Maya said accusingly. Kayale shrugged. Apparently your vow of silence has ended. He looked at Nick. You are Nicholas Freestone. Nick didn't respond. And you, Kaile said, looking at Maya, are Indaw's sister and Twangba's great granddaughter, Maya, if I'm not mistaken. He smiled. Don't worry, your secret is safe. Twangba did not tell Captain Moto about me, and I will not tell anybody about you. He pointed to the note. You were right about Hilltop. He left some time ago. He wasn't here when I arrived, and I've been here for 2 hours. Why did you follow us? Maya asked. Curiosity. At the village, I wasn't certain you were the two youngsters from Hawk's Nest. The rumor was that you'd both died in the forest. Now I know you didn't. But you're not going to tell anybody, Nick said. Not a living soul. Maya and Nick weren't sure they believed him. Hannibal came up from the stream and started sniffing around a stand of tamarinds to see if any pods had fallen while he slept. Magnificent elephant. Where did he come from? He belongs to my father, Nick answered. If the Japanese find out you have a trained timber elephant, they will follow you to the ends of the earth. They are short of elephants. They're not going to find out, Nick said. They might. If I found you, they can find you. Only if they're looking, Maya said. True, Kaile said with another smile. Now tell me, why has the oldest monk gone to the labor camp? Nick and Maya were not about to tell him anything about their plans. Kaile laughed. Another vow of silence? All right, let me tell you why I think he's gone there. You're wondering if you can get Jackson Freestone or Indall, or perhaps both of them out of the camp, yes? Nick hesitated, then nodded. Maya shot Nick a sour look, which he ignored. Maybe Kaile could help them. Have you been to the camp? Many times, and there are actually 3 camps. Kaile squatted down and motioned for them to join him. He put Nick's candle on the ground and smoothed the patch of dirt near it. The first camp is here. He drew an X with a stick. It's abandoned now. They moved to the second camp, here, a few weeks ago. This is where Jackson and Indall are. The third camp is up here, and it's just about completed, so I think they'll be leaving for the third camp soon. Have you seen my brother or Mr. Freestone? Indall, yes. Jackson Freestone, no. I don't even know what he looks like. There are hundreds of British laborers. How is Indall? He was fine when I talked to him a few weeks ago. How could you talk to him? Nick asked. The Mahoots are in an adjoining camp, Kaile explained. It's guarded, but much less so than the compound where the foreign prisoners are being held. If you are on good terms with the guards at the Mahoot camp, you can come and go as you please. I don't understand, Maya said. If it's so easy, why hasn't Indall escaped? Because of you, Kaile answered. Colonel Nagayoshi promised to punish you if Indall tried to escape. It's their family members that keep the Mahoots there, not the guards. Indall doesn't know you left Hawk's Nest. I would have told him myself, but as I said, I haven't been to the camp in several weeks. It's not safe for me to go there now. Why? Nick asked. Captain Moto. He has gotten it into his head that I am working with the Kachin guerrillas. There was a lot of information about the Kachins among the colonel's papers. They were a fierce mountain tribe from northern Burma, fanatically dedicated to destroying the Japanese. Small bands of guerrillas had successfully attacked supply convoys and depots, gun emplacements, and patrols. The colonel was afraid they would try to destroy the airfield, but Mogwai beat them to it. This was one reason Nick wanted to get the notebook to his stepfather. He thought Bernard would be very interested in the Kachin's activities. Are you working with the Kachins? Nick asked. Kaile smiled. Let's just say that Captain Moto is a smart and ambitious officer. He has made it very difficult for me to move around freely. He stood up. In fact, I should be going. I have some people to meet. I just wanted to thank you for not mentioning my name to Moto. Please tell Twang Ba that I'm very grateful. We will, Maya said. If I were you, I would forget the labor camp, Kaile said. I'll get word to Indall that you are no longer at Hawk's Nest. He won't need your help to get out of the Mahout camp. What about my father? Nick asked. He's sick. He needs to get out of there too. Kaile gave him a sympathetic look. I wish I could help you, he said, then walked off into the darkness. Hilltop reached the outskirts of the first camp a little after midnight. The barbed wire had been taken down, but the fence posts and bamboo guard towers were still standing. A great sadness filled him as he walked through the abandoned camp. It was much bigger than he thought it would be. Lined up in the center were the bamboo prisoner barracks. The roof thatching caved in now, the woven walls in tatters. In a year or less, the jungle would reclaim the camp, hiding all traces of the suffering and death that had taken place there. On the far end of the camp, outside where the fence had been, were the graves, row after row of bamboo crosses with dog tags hanging from them. A few hundred yards outside the camp, Hilltop found the tracks. He followed them. Hilltop reached the second camp at sunrise. A sleepy sentry stepped out in front of him and asked where he thought he was going. To see my great grandson, Indal, Hilltop answered in Japanese, which clearly startled the sentry. Not many Burmese spoke Japanese, and fewer still with a perfect accent. By whose authority? The sentry asked a bit more respectfully. Colonel Nagayoshi. The sentry stood up a little straighter when he heard the name. Hilltop was relieved. It meant that the colonel still held the power, or else his loss of it hadn't filtered down to the sentry level yet. The soldier gave him directions and bowed when he left. There was no barbed wire around the Mahout camp, and only a handful of soldiers who barely looked at him as he walked by. The camp reminded Hilltop of the elephant village below Hawk's Nest, although it was somewhat bigger. A neat row of bamboo houses near a shallow river, goats tied beneath them, chickens pecking in the dirt. The elephants were tied to a rope picket line in front of the houses. 21 elephants altogether. Hilltop recognized Chuchin Chow, Miss Pretty, and several others. Normally, Mahouts preferred their elephants to be free at night so they could feed themselves. The Japanese, no doubt, thought catching the elephants in the morning was a waste of time and had ordered the Mahouts to tie them. This meant the Mahouts had to go out and gather food in the evening. A hungry elephant will not work. The Japanese would need dozens of soldiers to guard the Mahouts as they gathered food unless they trusted them, which they obviously did in this camp. The Mahouts were just waking up, checking their elephants, putting their tea water on the fires. Hilltop heard Indaw before he saw him. His warm laugh pealed through the dark morning. He found his great grandson sitting next to the fire nearest the elephants. He was telling a story to a group of Mahouts. When Indaw spoke, all eyes were on him, and they didn't notice Hilltop walk up. He waited for the story to end and the laughter to die down before speaking. Indaw, he said. Indaw jumped up. Twang Ba? He ran over and threw his arms around Hilltop in a hug that hurt the monk's old bones. The other Mahouts were on their feet as well, heads bowed, honored to have the great Twang Ba pay the camp a visit. Indaw guided him over to the fire, sat him down, and gave him a cup of green tea. Are you hungry? The tea is fine for now. Where did you come from? The forest. I know that, but I suppose you have to go to work soon, Hilltop said, feigning regret. A few of the Mahouts were already saddling their elephants. Ah, Indaw said with a conspiratorial smile. Unfortunately, Miss Pretty pulled a leg muscle just this morning. He looked at the other Mahouts. Remember? They all nodded and smiled back at him. I've told the Japanese that the elephants should be freed at night so this wouldn't happen. She'll have to rest today. If she doesn't, the injury will certainly become worse. And we would hate to lose a great timber elephant like Miss Pretty, as she can outwork any 3 elephants in the camp. The other Mahouts laughed at this. Indaw stood. I'd better go tell the officer in charge. While Indaw was gone, Hilltop chatted with the other Mahouts. Two of him were from the plantation and watched as they saddled and put the dragging gear on their elephants. Indall returned in time to see the elephants saunter off into the forest, leaving Miss Pretty behind. The officer thought it was quite a coincidence that Miss Pretty was injured the day my great grandfather showed up in camp, he said, but he gave us the day off anyway. He's not a bad sort as far as Japanese go. Now tell me, how is Maya? Is there some place we can talk without anyone overhearing? Of course. Indall fed Miss Pretty, then led Hilltop into his house. All right, guys, look for your next chapters tomorrow.